The NCAA basketball tournament, March Madness. You're not a basketball fan? Okay. I played basketball and football. Yeah. Yeah. I wasn't any good, but I played basketball and football. I tried. Yeah. Now my
Yeah.
older brother was good. He was a walk on. I wasn't any University good, of Colorado, but he didn't make the team. But he was pretty good in high school. Yeah. There you go. Sure. I'm the associate pastor at Kerrville Bible Church in Kerrville, Texas. Was the pastor of a smaller church in Colorado, Southwest Colorado, for about 16 years. Before that, I was an architect in Aspen, Colorado, for about 10 years, and I've written a couple of books, and I've got four sons. Three that well, two that just recently got married, one that's getting married this summer, and then I've got one son that's still in the home with us.
Nice.
So, and we
Congratulations.
homeschool him.
Yeah.
Homeschooled all my boys, and so yeah.
Yeah, it's actually a really interesting fact because I recently did a debate on homeschooling, and homeschooling is like people who are homeschooled do significantly better than people who go to public schools or private schools.
Yeah, we've discovered that with our own boys. Yeah, they are in high demand with jobs. In fact, two of my sons work for a company in Southern California, and both of them are being offered pretty significant chunks of money to stay with that company long term.
Nice, nice.
And so yeah, it's worked out well for us.
So I invited you on today because I wanted to talk about your problem of evil theodicy. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So I've written a book called "What About Evil." The subtitle is called "Defense of God's Sovereign Glory." It tries to tackle the perennial problem of evil that typically is regarded as the Achilles heel for Christian, theism, and and so I try to address all of the primary issues with the problem, um, from a really more from a theological standpoint than necessarily a philosophical standpoint. I'm not an analytic philosopher, though I depend on some of the work of some analytic philosophers, and some well-known guys reviewed my book to make sure I wasn't completely off in the weeds in some areas. But my emphasis is more on the theological side of things, and really looking more at a biblical framework for how to make sense of evil in the world, in terms of the broad meta narrative of the Bible. And so that's where my primary focus is. I don't skip the other issues, but I'm not an expert in those areas. I'm more of a popularizer, you might say. So I write for an audience, that's mostly pastors and lay people and others like yourselves that might be interested in what Christians have to say about this subject.
Yeah, the problem of evil was probably one of the main reasons that I left the faith. It's definitely a significant issue. I was reading some of the polls, and I think it's one of the two biggest issues that causes most current atheists to leave the faith from Christianity. So, what is your opinion on it, and how do you rectify it in the face of Christianity?
Well, certainly it's not just a problem for people who've left the faith. It's a problem for those who remain in the faith. The experience of evil in this world sometimes can be horrific. Being a pastor, I've had to deal with a number of very tragic and disheartening realities. I can give you an example that's very close to home. A number of years ago, in a church that I was pastoring, we had two young twin boys that were part of our church, and parents were separated. They lived half their time with their father and half their time with their mother. The mother was kind of strung out on methamphetamines and had some boyfriends that lived with them in her trailer. And one day she came home with the two boys. They were probably about 7 or 8 years old. And they walk into the trailer, and her boyfriend had shot himself in the head, blew his brains all over the inside of the trailer, and those boys had to see all that. And they were part of a children's group in our church,
Wow.
and most people didn't know that that happened, but I did. And I know the impact that it had on those young boys, and it was tragic for sure.
Wow.
And it's just one of multiple stories that I could tell of experiences that I've had interacting with um, with the problem. So, from a Christian standpoint, we believe, Christians believe the Bible makes sense of evil and why it even exists. Um, and it goes back to, the Garden of Eden, um, in which we believe Adam and Eve um, sinned against God, against a set of moral obligations that God pressed upon not only them, but all of humanity, because all human beings, we believe, are created in the image of God, are meant to reflect the character of God and be in a vital relationship with Him. But that must be based on a standard of holiness, um, a standard of morality that reflects the very character of God. And because humans have rebelled against God, He placed a curse upon our world that includes not just a curse of being enslaved to one's sins and wayward, corrupted appetites, if you will, but that there's a curse upon the whole world, so that we live in a world where there is what philosophers call natural evil as well as moral evil. So you have moral evil, in which people who have moral obligations violate those obligations, such as um, rape and murder and stealing and all these sorts of things. So those would be violations of the command to love your neighbor, as yourself. Which is one of the two most important commands that the Bible gives. And so when we don't love one another, we are violating a command that God has set before all human beings. And really, you can summarize all moral commands to the command to love one another. Um, love God and love others is essentially how Jesus summarized, the commandments of God. So when we commit, sins, it usually is in one way or another a violation of our relationship with God or our relationship with other people, whether that's people you're close to or people that you don't even know. And so that would be moral evil, and then natural evil would include things like COVID-19. We live in a cursed world where bad stuff happens, and we you get earthquakes and famines and disease and sickness and weak human weakness, and things, buildings fall apart and crumble, and and I Christians believe that intuitively, as human beings, we know that it's not supposed to be this way. The world is not supposed to be this way. This is why throughout history, you have cultures that are always trying to develop some kind of utopia, If we could just change certain things in the world, we could create a utopia where we don't have all these terrible things happening. But of course, it's a frustrating quest, if you will, because there's never been a utopia that has worked, and it's because I think people have sought um, the wrong the wrong approach to what we need as human beings. And so that gets right into the heart of what Christianity is really all about. But that would really kind of a basic groundwork for at least the existence of evil, and that the Bible explains the existence of both natural and moral evil, going all the way back to this curse that God placed upon the earth as a result of the rebellion of Adam and Eve, that then extended to all of their progeny, which is the rest of humanity.
Yeah, for sure. So I totally agree on the natural evil side. I think that many of the things that happen, like tornadoes, tsunamis, earthquakes, those kinds of things that do kill people, are a form of evil. Like many moral philosophers disagree. They think that's just bad. It wouldn't be classified as evil or immoral. But I tend to agree that natural evils are a thing and that we should do what we can to prevent them. But for me, the story of Adam and Eve is very anthropocentric, very kind of like the Norse gods, very human in many ways. I don't see it as a story that would be exemplified by actions of the most powerful being who created the universe. It seems like it's very human, too human. Because to me, it seems like you could have gotten all of the benefits without doing any of the bad things. Like the natural evils seem to be kind of redundant. You don't why create natural evils, and why punish Adam and Eve who didn't even know right from wrong before they had the apple in the first place, and why provide the apple. All of this seems kind of erroneous. Like we could have just given everyone free will without the ability to hurt one another. So, for example, I can't fly. I can't just jump off my building and fly right now,
Right.
but I still have free will, right? So, the fact that I am unable to do certain things does not limit my free will. So, if I was unable to say the world, I think, or the law I think that should have been added would be it would be impossible to force anyone to do anything they don't consent to doing. If God had added that as a law of physics, that would seem much more like what you would expect an all-powerful being who knows everything to do. He would get the moral principle right the first time. And it seems very hard for me to grasp how the Adam and Eve story could have been made by an all-powerful being. It seems much more like something a human made up, like the stories of Zeus and Thor and the Norse and Greek gods. Just a human story to try and explain something.
Right, right. So yeah, that's definitely a challenge for the Christian worldview. But I think it's also the very benefit of the worldview, at least as I understand it and the way I lay it out in my book. And so, to me, it begs the question: why did God? And this really gets to the heart of the problem. If God is all powerful, omnipotent, and He is all good, then it would seem He would never create a world in which evil would enter into that world. And it seems that would be the obvious reality. And so, as David Hume, the great English philosopher from 1700s, basically said, if God is omnipotent and and omnibenevolent, then why is there evil in the world? It seems that one of those two attributes would be under assault, that either he can't stop evil in the world, he might want there to be no evil in the world, but he can't stop it because he doesn't have any power to stop it. Or it could be that he has the power to stop it, but he wants evil to be in the world, and therefore he's malviolent. He's an evil God, and therefore we can't believe in God because of one of those two characteristics. Well, I think it's even further than that. You could extend the argument to include all the characteristics of God. He certainly must not be very wise, if he's allowed evil in the world. and he has the power to stop it. Um, it impugns his omniscience, right? That he is all knowing. You know, if God somehow knows that the Holocaust was going to take place in the future, as the Bible would indicate, you know, that he has knowledge of all future events. Well, surely he wasn't. It didn't take him by surprise that all this was going to happen, and so it's an assault on the full character of God. And it's interesting that a lot of philosophers have not even delved into that. They tend to focus just on God's omnipotence or his omnibenevolence, you know, as characteristics that are described by Christian theism. But really, it's an assault on the full character of God. So it is a very serious problem. But I also think that most Christians have a very weak view of God. And I come from the Calvinistic tradition, in which I believe that God actually ordained the fall of Adam and Eve to take place. Um, and that God, in fact, ordains everything that takes place in the world, including both good and evil. So that raises a whole host of questions, which is why my book is 500 and some pages. Um, but just to get to the heart of what my argument in my book is, because it raises the question: okay, if God is all wise, if He is all powerful, if He is all good, and He is all knowing, and He is the creator of everything, then why did He create this world in which evil would occur? And you raise a very important question, because you know, and I address that very point in my book. You know, you say, you know, God could have created conditions where there was not the possibility for evil to take place. That Adam and Eve, um, whether you regard them as historical figures or not, I do. Some Christians don't regard them as historical figures and more kind of metaphorical personages, but I take them as literal human beings. Uh, in either case, he could have created conditions in the Garden of Eden, as the Bible indicates in the book of Genesis, in which they would have never been tempted. He could have prevented the serpent that represented Satan, that came and tempted Adam and Eve. He could have prevented the serpent from entering the garden. So why didn't he? Um, uh, you know, and he could have created conditions where they would have never rebelled. And the reason why I say that is because we know that the Bible describes conditions in heaven, or what's known as the eternal state, when this present heavens and earth have been dissolved, and a new heavens and new earth takes its place. And that new heavens and new earth, there is no possibility for evil. And the Bible is very clear about that. And so the question is, why didn't God just start things that way? Well, so that sets the groundwork for my argument in my book, and this is what I say. I say that, you know, I have a kind of a syllogism that basically says God created the world not because He had any need to, because God doesn't need anything, but He created the world in order to magnify His glory to His creatures. And so then the question arises, well, how is God's glory most magnified? And I believe that His glory is most magnified in the redemption of this world, including the redemption of sinful human beings, rebellious human beings. And that the only way, once God chose that as His, freely chose that as His, you know, His purpose in creating the world, then the question is, how does this work of redemption um, take place? And I suggest it can only be through the incarnation, the death, resurrection, ascension, and eventual return of Jesus Christ, the central figure of the Christian faith. And that He is the ultimate hero of the story that redeems um, people who are mired in sin and evil and rebellion and death and chaos, and that He comes to redeem this world and restore it to conditions that are even better than what Eden would have been had it never fallen. So I seek to make the argument that it's better that we live in a world that has fallen and needing redemption than an unfallen world not needing redemption. And one of my arguments for this keys off of storytelling. And so throughout the history of the world, really, um, at least in the Western world, and really throughout the world, I believe we have a kind of uniform way of telling stories that humans resonate with, and then it doesn't matter what religion, what philosophy you hold to, what, it resonates with us all. And that basically every good story starts with the assumption of a set of ideal conditions, uh, the way the world should be. And then a good story always introduces some kind of a crisis, some kind of a conflict, that then, in the course of the plot, the unfolding plot of the story needs to be resolved. Um, and I think of, one of my favorite novels and movies is The Lord of the Rings. And so, you have, um, many of your listeners are probably familiar with it. You have this ideal set of conditions that's basically represented by the hobbits that live in the Shire, right? They're all happy. You see this at the beginning of the movie if you've seen the trilogy. That they're happy. They enjoy each other's company. They have fun parties, and everything is wonderful, right? But then there's this sinister evil lurking in the backdrop, and you've got this ring of power that whoever gets a hold of this ring of power tends to use it for evil. And so this ring of power needs to be destroyed. And so they form the Fellowship of the Ring, and Frodo Baggins is, kind of the hero, and he's this humble hobbit, who seems to be the only one that's capable of taking hold of this ring and taking it to Mount Doom to destroy it, and then to restore, you know, conditions to the way they should be, right? And so it's a compelling story, and we're all on the edge of our seats, and we're rooting for the heroes, and we want to see the villains, destroyed in terms of, Sauron and Saruman and all these evil characters and all the orcs and so forth, right? That represent evil. And so that story would not have anything compelling about it whatsoever if the movie began with the happiness of the Shire, and then happiness just continued along this straight line, and there was no conflict, there was no crisis to face, no need for a hero to intervene, and no villains to destroy and confront. It would be just this sort of flat line, that would be boring, and no one would find it compelling whatsoever. Nobody would ever go to a movie like that. You think of all the recent Marvel movies, where each of the superheroes are confronting some crisis, some, potential threat to the destruction of the universe, and you look at someone like Thanos, who's this arch villain that destroys half the universe, and half the people in the universe that just suddenly disappear and all of that. Those are compelling stories. Why are they compelling? I believe because God created human beings for a yearning for redemption, but redemption becomes unnecessary unless there's a crisis, unless there's a conflict, unless there's adversity, unless there's affliction, unless there's pain and suffering, that enters our world and screams out for some form of redemption. And so, even comedies, you just take a simple comedy, a sitcom, on television, yeah, it's a funny story and we laugh and all of that. But even sitcoms have some kind of crisis, some sort of conflict, some, maybe a lighthearted sort of thing, but the principle is the same. And even in tragic stories, um, where the hero becomes a kind of tragic figure, in the classic Aristotelian notion of storytelling, you have either a comedy or a tragedy. For example, most of Shakespeare's plays were tragedies, and a lot of people don't like tragedies, but I think tragedies are actually very powerful because they cause us to long all the more for comedy. So a comedy is when you have a good ending to the story, right? So you have the ideal conditions, then you have this, I call it a U-shaped storyline. So you have the ideal conditions that are usually either implied or explicitly indicated at the beginning of the story. Then you have this crisis, and then from the bottom of the U shape, you have this resolution, to the redemption part of the story where some hero enters in and saves the day, if you will. And then everything is, you have the happy ever after ending. And so tragedy actually is very useful because it causes the person who's reading or watching the tragic story to long all the more for the comedic ending. Not comedy in terms of bunch of laughs, but comedy in the sense of that the story ends well. And so I think that we're hardwired for that. We're hardwired to see redemption take place. And then when redemption does happen, it is actually more glorious because of the fact that we had to be dragged through the mud. We had to be dragged through these horrific kinds of things, so that in the end we can have a deeper appreciation for the high price that was paid, the sacrifices that were made, and the strength of character of the heroes or whatnot that was necessary in order for the crisis or conflict to be overcome. And I believe that basic impulse in storytelling that has been true across the ages, is a reflection of the one true story, which I believe is laid out in the Bible, which is that you have creation. God created the world. He created Eden where there was no sin, there was no evil, everything was perfect. That's the way it's supposed to be. And then you have the fall, Adam and Eve, that caused this curse, that caused this evil to enter into the story. And then Jesus Christ comes as the arc hero of the whole narrative of not only the Bible, but of all of history, because I believe the Bible is just reflective of what actually happens in real history. And that Jesus Christ is the central hero of the story and, brings redemption to the world. And we could get into all the details of that, but that's the basic framework, I believe, that God has purposely designed so that humans that are being redeemed will have a deeper appreciation for their redemption than if they had never required redemption in the first place.
I can sort of see that, but again, that's what makes it seem so human to me. Because if we think about Lord of the Rings, I also really enjoyed those movies. But if the ring wraiths could literally come out of the movie and stab you, no one would go to the movie. So the fact that there's a screen there and that you can't be as directly affected by the negative consequence is what makes the movie so good. If you could be affected and killed by the orcs or Saruman or whatever, people would not be lauding it as a great movie. It wouldn't be inspirational. People would be suing Peter Jackson and the directors for killing people. So I think the same thing applies to God here, that he could have made a compelling story, that's fine, but forcing people into the situation where they can be slaughtered by the story doesn't make it a compelling story. It makes it just evil. And so I think that your movie analogy is a good analogy, because the movie is a good, inspiring story because you're not at risk of being harmed by the movie. And once the movie can harm you, it stops being a compelling story and starts to be literal torture and slavery. So I think that if God wrote this story in such a way that we are the victims of the movie and we didn't consent to be here, then God is evil. He's someone that we should not worship. He's someone we should condemn. And so to me, it seems like a better way to have written the story would be to give people the option to have the direct experience of being affected by the movie, or to give them the option to be like, no, yeah, I don't really want to do that. So like in a movie, you can choose to volunteer to go to the military or whatever. Or you can choose to be like, nope, I'm going to stay at home and not join the military and get shot. And I think that's a more moral way to do things than forcing people to be victims to things that they had no choice in. It seems like that way of doing things is evil in and of itself. And if there really was an all-powerful, all-loving being who existed. You mentioned the Epicurean dilemma. If God is willing to prevent evil but unable, he's not omnipotent. If he's able but unwilling, he's malevolent. If he's both able and willing, whence cometh evil? And then if he's neither able or willing, why call him God? That's the
Yeah,
you
right.
mentioned that one, and so I think that that's a good way to portray the problem, because it seems like if God really was, if there really was an all powerful, all loving being, the way he could have done it was just add an extra condition of make it optional, so we can have the entire world as designed by God with Jesus and suffering and Adam and Eve and the apple. But one extra condition, he just gives everyone the option. Do you want to be a part of this world and have all of the benefits of going through this narrative archetype that leads to some kind of positive emotional story outcome of valuing the redemption? Or would you like to opt out and be like, no, you don't really want to be part of that. I'm going to go play my video games or whatever. That seems to be a more moral way to have done things that should obviously be possible for God. But since he
Right.
didn't do it, he seems quite malevolent.
Yes. I think we should make a distinction between, the movie world or the literary world, in terms of, yeah, no one would watch the movie if the ring race came out and actually stabbed you or whatever. Yeah, of course. But that's not the point. The point is that the movies reflect real life. The stories that we tell reflect our own stories, and we want to put together stories in a cohesive way that makes sense of the actual world we live in. And because we live in a world where we actually do experience evil, and sometimes the ring race actually do kill us, right? I'm saying that metaphorically because, people experience evil, and and people do evil, and it's important in the Christian worldview that you understand that there are two things that happen. Number one, the Bible says that all of us do evil, right? None of us escapes evil thoughts, evil intentions, and none of us um, stops, none of us escapes actions that are in fact evil. When we start to say that, no, I don't do evil, I've never had an evil thought, I've never done anything evil, most people, most people look at that and say, well, you're just not being honest with yourself, because, and you're being self-righteous. In fact, many Christians are accused of being self-righteous because they hold to certain moral standards. But true Christianity recognizes that we're all evil, and that apart from the work of redemption that comes through Christ, I stand judged before God, in, before his cosmic courtroom, if you will, because we've all had evil thoughts. I mean, why do we see what's going on in Russia and Ukraine right now? It's because people are evil. People do evil things. Some people do more evil things than other people. Some people are prevented in certain ways. I find it interesting that there's a number of stories in Poland during World War II where people had cultivated anti Semitic attitudes. And when the Nazis invaded Poland, they knew that there existed this pervasive anti Semitism throughout the country. And so the Nazis didn't have a lot of forces to just send troops into every little town and every little hamlet throughout Poland, because they had, other things they wanted to do. But they would send a few officers into some of these smaller villages, and basically, under the threat of annihilation, they would come in and gerryman their political structures in these little villages, the village elders, or the city council or whatever, and convinced them that they would see no harm if they would take the Jews that were in their town and kill them. These are just regular people, right? And so they didn't bring in a lot of armed, German soldiers, and yeah, it had a handful, and they did threaten them. But basically, they convinced these normal people to, there's a town called Jebuon in Poland during World War II, a village of about 600 people. 300 of those people were Jews. And the Nazis convinced the regular people that on a particular day, they would just round up all the Jews and kill them. And that's exactly what they did. They got clubs and, whatever weapons they did have, baseball bats, whatever, and they went literally to their neighbors' homes and dragged them out into the streets and beat them to death. And the remaining people that they couldn't kill that way, they rounded them up in a church building of all things, shoved them in a church building, set the church building on fire, and I think about 100 of them died inside of a church building. And so when the Nazis that did this, it was the townspeople who did it to their own neighbors. And under normal circumstances, most human beings would not do that sort of thing, that would commit those kind of atrocities. But as I read a book on this a number of years ago, and I was reflecting on the book, I'm thinking, every human heart has the potential to do atrocious things. And that's what the Bible tells us. So that's one aspect of the reality of evil in our world, of moral evil, right?
Yeah, I think that's
But the
a
other
good.
aspect is that
Well, one second. I think
sometimes
that's a
we're the
good point.
victims, right? Sometimes we're the victims of that evil. We're the Jews, in the Holocaust, or slaves who have been stolen from their African nation and taken to the West, and enslaved, and they become victims of evil. So we both are perpetrators and victims at the same time throughout life.
Well, it
And
wouldn't be better if we could just not have that. So, for example, Stephen Hawking was a paraplegic, or what's it, quadriplegic, so he couldn't move his arms or his legs, and so he can have all of the evil thoughts anyone else could. He could have been one of the Polish people in that story, but he could have done nothing to kill the Poles. He's just physically not able to do so.
Yeah, right.
So if everybody was a paraplegic in that town, they could all have equally had all of the evil intentions that the Poles did, or that the Nazis did, but they could have done nothing to actually enact those intentions on the Jews. Now, obviously, I don't want everyone to be paraplegic, because there are other consequences to that, but there's clearly a way to cause physical limitations such that it's impossible to do those evils onto people with maintaining the desires. You can still be evil. You can still have all the intentions. You can still covet your neighbor's wife. You can still lie. You can still desire to hurt other people. But if there's a limitation that you can't physically do it, then I think that's exactly analogous to many humans on the planet who are quadriplegics, paraplegics, people who don't have access to nuclear weapons. There's lots of things we cannot do to harm other people. And if those same physical limitations were placed on everyone, so like I mentioned earlier, if it was impossible to force people to do things they didn't consent to doing, you could still have all the evil, all of the free will, all of the being judged in front of God because you're still a sinner, but without the rape and murder and torture bit.
Yeah. So, yeah, you're introducing some other elements into this discussion that we haven't really delved into, because there's so many issues when you're dealing with the problem of evil that you have to kind of grapple with. And one of them is this: you keep using this idea of forced. We're forced to do this, or forced into this situation, and and so it raises the whole question of free will. And and so one approach to the problem of evil that many Christians, in fact, it's the primary approach to the problem of evil that Christians use, and I think many non-Christians would agree, at least in principle, with this notion, is that humans have free will. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, in the standard notion of free will is technically known as libertarian free will. And in libertarian free will, there's basically, I believe, two basic definitions, or two basic components to the definition of libertarian free will. Number one is that human choices cannot be determined sufficiently by anything. So God cannot be the ultimate determiner of choices. In fact, nothing can be the ultimate or sufficient determiner of choices except for the chooser, the choosing agent himself. Okay. So that leads to a second plank, which is that you could have always chosen differently under the same circumstances. Okay. So you're confronted, you come to a fork in the road, and nothing compels you to take the left fork or the right fork. And so libertarian free will says that there's no sufficient causal reason for why I would go left or would go right. And so I can make either of those choices equally, and nothing compels me to make one choice or the other. That's the basic definition of free will. Now, I think there are serious problems with that definition of free will. Um, but that's most people who believe in free will believe that that's what secures moral responsibility. Now, from the theological standpoint, if you believe in God, many Christians will say, well, God granted human beings this free will. Okay, so he granted Adam and Eve free will. And so the reason why Adam and Eve sinned is because they were presented with the opportunity to sin. They could have refused uh, that opportunity to eat the apple, as you say. It wasn't really an apple, but anyway, that's fine. They could have chosen to eat the apple or not eat the apple, and they had an equal power to do either or. So that's what free will would say. And so that God valued free will so much that he created the world where such free will exists, but in doing so, he took a huge risk that that his creatures would choose evil instead of good. Um, but it's not from a theological standpoint. Now, and I understand many atheists, perhaps such as yourself, would hold to that view of free will, and many non-Christians do, even though I still believe it has problems. But from the Christian standpoint, I'm just talking specifically now from the Christian standpoint for those who within Christianity hold to that view. Typically, they're known as free will theists. Those that would fall into that category would be classical Arminians, open theists, and another brand of free will theism called Molinism. So these get into some really technical details about how you work all that out. But the point is they believe that that's the only way you can secure moral culpability for choices. That the only reason why we could be morally culpable is if we had the ability to choose other than what we did choose. So that Hitler had the choice to either save Jews or kill Jews. If you want to simplify it that sort of way. Um, but I don't believe that moral culpability is tied to our ability to choose otherwise. In other words, I'm not morally culpable um, for making choice A because I could have made choice B, and the Bible doesn't place moral culpability in that ability, if you will. Rather, the Bible always assigns moral culpability to two factors. Number one, the fact that we intuitively know what's right and wrong, so that human beings intuitively know that it's right to love your neighbor and wrong to hate them. Okay. And so we have that knowledge implanted already on our conscience, so that when we show hatred towards someone, say like in a case of racism, um, that we intuitively know that that's wrong, and that to love our neighbor, no matter who they are, is intuitively right. We know that because God has implanted that. We believe God has implanted that on every human heart, and therefore that means that moral culpability is always tied to the intentions of your heart. So if you intend evil, you are culpable for evil because that's what you intended. Now, the question is, if God is sovereign, if God is the ultimate cause of everything, you would think, well, there's a conflict there, because if God ultimately causes everything, then how can humans be free in that sense? And that gets into the whole realm of compatibilism. So if you get into the philosophical debates, you have the free will, libertarian free will guys, and you have the compatibilist guys, and I'm a compatibilist. And so I believe that our choices are determined and yet free. Free in what sense? Free in the sense that, number one, they're never coerced by God. Now, you might find yourself in human situations or temporal situations where there's coercion involved, but it doesn't come from God. It may come from other people. For example, somebody may may put a gun to your head and force you to do something that you wouldn't want to do. Well, that's a form of coercion, right? But that coercion isn't coming from God directly, and so you have to sort through all those kinds of things. So the point is that God can be the determiner of all things ultimately, uh, but none of that involves coercion, because people freely make the choices that they make in the sense that they do so voluntarily or willingly, and that they do so based on the most compelling reasons that that come from their thoughts and intentions. And so that's where moral culpability lies. And so I've written another book on this subject called "What About Free Will?" And again, it's a popular book. It's not intended to delve into all the deep philosophical issues, um, but it's to help mainly Christians understand the distinction between, you know, God as ultimately sovereign and yet not culpable, because God always has some ultimately good reason for the evil that he has ordained to take place in the world. If he didn't, then it wouldn't happen. And so God would never ordain anything that he did not have some ultimately good purpose for. And but we don't always know what those reasons are. So this gets into another realm of philosophical issues called skeptical theism, which is that if God has some greater good for some evil that takes place in the world, would we know what that good is? Not necessarily. But on the same token, could we decisively indicate that there could be no possible good from, any particular evil that God might bring out of that evil? And that's not possible to answer either. And so basically, you're put in a quandary. You can't say yes or no that God does or doesn't have some greater good for some evil that he may purpose in the world. But I suggest that from the broad picture, God's ultimate good is that a world that goes through the crisis of evil and comes out the backside gloriously restored in the final state of history and eternity, that's a far better outcome than had God created the conditions of the world where the fall never took place, where evil never entered the picture. There are no villains. There'd be no opportunity for courage, of heroes. There'd be no opportunity to extend mercy to enemies, which is essentially what Jesus Christ does through his death and resurrection. He extends grace or mercy to those who don't deserve it. And for anyone who's experienced the grace of God in that way, there's nothing more powerful. And a great example of that would be someone like John Newton. John Newton was a slave trader in the 1700s, and he ran a slave ship between England and the islands in the Atlantic where they picked up, in Africa where they picked up slaves, and he became a Christian later on in life, and one of the things that he regretted more than anything was the fact that he was a slave. He was captain of a slave ship, and yet he wrote the most famous song, really the most famous song in the history of the world, which is the hymn "Amazing Grace." And in that hymn, he basically says, "I once was lost, but now I'm found." You know, you know, and speaks of his wretched condition and how God saved him out of that, and and God had mercy on him when he should not have had mercy on him, and God gloriously saved him from his own rebellion when he should have deserved nothing but justice. And um, and so but there is no opportunity to display mercy. There's no opportunity to forgive someone who has, you know, deeply sinned against you. The story of Corrie Ten Boom in World War II is interesting too, because she watched her sister die in a concentration camp at the hands of a guard who later became a Christian and sought her forgiveness for what he had done. Of course, it was very difficult for her to think of that, but she did forgive him. And there was a bond that was created between her and that former guard in that concentration camp that is phenomenal. That would never, there would never be the opportunity for those kinds of bonds to exist, if the Holocaust had not happened, at least in their case. Um, so that's what I believe. Christians have to deal with reality. I realize you as an atheist are saying, well, all of this tells me that God can't exist. But I think that it actually points to God's existence because he is doing something very amazing in this evil world, that he is redeeming this world. And I believe that resonates more with our souls as human beings than you know than conditions where that wouldn't be the case, because that's the reality we live in. We all live in this world that has evil in it, so we have to make sense of it. And so my challenge for someone like you is, where do you find hope? Is there any hope for someone who doesn't believe in God, or does this life end so you grab all the gusto you can in this life, and then it's all over with, and we just disappear into nothingness? I don't think there's hope in that. I don't know what you believe, but where do you find hope, I guess, in an atheistic world?
Yeah, so there's a few things there you mentioned. The first thing is that the intentions. One of the things in Christianity that you said, and I agree with, is that the intentions can be evil. If you intend to do harm, you're doing evil, regardless of whether you do the harm. But this causes a problem for Christianity, because if all you need is the intentions, then you don't need the action. You can still have the evil, you can still have the free will, you don't need the actual murder as long as someone intends it. And therefore, you still can have all the good and evil dichotomy and all of the courage and things without the actual murder. You don't need the actual murder because you have the intentions, which are just as evil. And so the fact that the intentions themselves can be evil, like a paraplegic, like Stephen Hawking, quadriplegic, can have those intentions and not be able to act on them, but still be evil, means that you can still have all of the evilness stuff and whatever benefit that the evilness is required for, without actually being able to act on it. And so it seems obvious that God could have made a better world just by allowing all of the evil intentions. So you still have all of the sin, but you just can't murder people. At least not who don't consent to it. And the second thing I wanted to get to was free will. Like I'm quite familiar with compatibilism. I'm more of a determinist myself, but compatibilism is just the position that free will is compatible with determinism. So I'm fine with compatibilism. But like you mentioned that a story with courage is significantly better than a story without courage. And you mentioned some other things, and I'm totally agree with that. But we can do you one better. We can make it even better by making the story optional. So I agree that a story with courage would be better than like just the bland, like perfect line of no change. But you can make it even better than that. You make it optional. So for example, I have the option of going to see Lord of the Rings. Now, if I didn't have the option, if I was forced to go see Lord of the Rings, it would make the story much less enjoyable, not as good of a story anymore, because I've been forced to go. And so if I'm given the option to go,
now, my wife would feel that way. She doesn't like Lord of the Rings. So if I made her watch Lord of the Rings, then she wouldn't like that.
Yeah, exactly. So we can have the courage, which is better than just a bland story, but we can make the story even better by giving people the option to go, or option to be a part of it. And so I agree that this metric of making a better story is an important one, but there's a way that we could have made the Christian story entirely better just by making it optional. Be like, would you like to go be a part of the whole Jesus world story with all the pain and suffering, or would you like to opt out? Giving people that option would have made it a significantly more moral story, a better story. And the third thing I wanted to mention was, it seems to me that the lives of the slaves and all of their suffering was significantly worse morally worse than the benefit of the Amazing Grace song. I don't think Amazing Grace was worth all of the suffering and pain that all of those slaves went through. So even though a benefit could have come out of it, the suffering was significantly outweighed there. And then you asked, where do I find hope? I think that there can definitely be afterlives without a God. You don't need a God for an afterlife. There's many religions that have that. And so I think that whether or not there is an afterlife has equal probability with or without a God. So there could be an afterlife where we essentially wake up in Lord of the Rings and you get to go play Frodo and be all the Lord of the Rings or Star Wars or whatever. And that's equally as likely to have an afterlife like that, whether or not there's a God. You don't need a God for that. So I don't think there's any evidence of that. Just like I don't think there's any evidence of a God, but either one is possible. And so I still have hope regardless of whether or not there's a God.
So what would your hope lie in?
Nature,
What gives you hope?
nature and the possibilities of what's out there that we just haven't discovered yet. Reality, progress, technology. I think that eventually, like you mentioned, the utopia thing, I think eventually, technologically, we will be able to make a utopia. It seems like all of the things we've done in nature so far are leading us there. Like we've improved the quality of life and life expectancy by over 3 times in the past 200 years, made people happier, given people more freedoms. And as long as we continue to grow in technological means, we will continue to move towards that utopia where there will be no death. We're going to be able to solve death.
So with that increased technology, you have like nuclear weapons and things like that, and the threat of annihilation. So what keeps you from hoping against hope that technology won't be used to destroy ourselves?
The patterns in human nature. So, like the nuclear weapons you mentioned, we've had the long peace over the past 50 or so years, where there have been, until the past week, essentially no wars between any major nations in the world, which is the longest period in human history where there was no major wars. So, this nuclear proliferation and the balancing of power has prevented wars more than it has caused them. And so, as we grow in technology and we get artificial intelligences, those are going to be really cool. We're essentially not going to have any war anymore. It's going to be decrease, not increase, which is the pattern we've seen.
Yeah.
Stephen Pinker's book, The Better Angels of Our Natures, articulates all the different ways in which our world has gotten better as technology has improved. And even though there are weapons that go along with that, those weapons are deterrents for the most part. So we see a decrease in all forms of violence and crime and bigotry, and everything that we consider to be evil or bad has been going down, and lives have been getting better as we have improved in technology. Yeah. And so if we just continue to follow that pattern, we're going to get to the utopia, as long as like Yellowstone National Park doesn't blow up first.
Well, I think there's a different take on what we see happening today. You know, we just escaped the 1 century where more human death was killed through evil regimes and war than in all the rest of history. You know, the literally hundreds of millions of people died either through communist Russia, communist China, you know, World War I and World War II. We've just come out of the backside of the bloodiest century in the history of the world. And so that doesn't give me hope that that we're going to get any better. I think the world has gone through some pretty horrific things through most of the 20th century, and we're experiencing a reprieve, perhaps, of an upward trend toward, you know, a world getting worse and worse. And I don't think technology has changed that. I think technology has just um, supplemented or facilitated, um, you know, the kinds of wars that we can conduct, for example, in the 20th century that could never have been conducted in the Middle Ages, with firepower and tanks and airplanes and battleships, you know, and armaments that are massive. And of course, now we do have nuclear weapons. And yes, I do believe that they have formed a deterrent, but I don't know that we have any good reason to think that we're not always on the brink of World War III. I mean, look at what's happening right now in Ukraine. Um, there's always that potential, and I don't think the hope against hope that somehow we're going to develop a utopia um, has much to say for it, because for thousands and thousands of recorded human history, we've never developed any utopia. Um, we have created some conditions in some nations that are less miserable than other places. I think America is one of those places. Um, but it's also interesting to me that America grew out of a set of conditions where people came to America uh, initially to escape religious persecution and formed a strong Christian basis. I'm not saying that America was founded as a Christian nation, because you had a mixture of Enlightenment thinking, which I think Steven Pinker would agree, with deistic uh, framework, not necessarily atheism. Atheism wasn't really a popular trend in
With
the
Thomas Paine, there
1700s.
were a few of
It
those.
was starting to move in that direction with the Enlightenment, but you still, you had Thomas Paine and some of those guys that had an influence. So yeah, there was, you can't, there's no kind of unified, set of principles that guided all of the founding fathers of America, that, which they were walking lockstep. So there's a different variety of influences on that. But I would suggest that Christianity had a very powerful influence on the creation of a nation that 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 was founded in freedom and gave people of all religious stripes freedom. Now, did we carry that out consistently? No, we had slavery, right? We had to fight a civil war in order to end slavery, and even then, it didn't end the prejudice and the racism, that resulted from that. So yes, we have our own set of atrocities. I happen to think abortion is a massive atrocity when we know that, people who get pregnant and they're like, yes, so we're going to have a baby. And other people get pregnant and say, no, that's not a baby. And I can kill what's in the womb. How can we just randomly make those choices for ourselves? I don't think we can. I think there's a set of invariable moral obligations that requires us to preserve life at all costs. And, and I think that comes from a Christian worldview. But that Christian worldview also encompasses the notion that God has placed those moral principles upon every human heart. So, regardless of whether or not you're a Christian or not, you know that instinctively it is wrong to take life and it is right to preserve life. And that basic distinction is true for all human beings, no matter how much that gets suppressed with our evil intentions and whatnot.
Yeah, yeah, I totally
But
agree on that point, which is I found it strange when you said the world is getting worse and worse, because on that belief that we should preserve life, it seems like all of our technology, even if we include all of the world wars and communism and all of those things, the percent of people who died there was still less than the percent of people who were dying in previous ages to all of the illness and the disease and the Black Plague. So even if we include, this is in Steven Pinker's book actually, even if we include all of the deaths in World War II and communism, the percent of people who died compared to the entire population of humans was less than at any other time period. So life expectancy for humans, even given those tragedies, is still 2 to 3 times larger than it was 100 years prior to that. So even
yeah,
with those terrible events, and the numbers, the reason hundreds of millions of people were able to be killed there was because there were hundreds of millions of more people on the planet. There are now billions on the planet, where there used to be only millions of people on the planet, because we had no way to sustain this many people. So even though the technology allows for these kinds of atrocities, it also allows for billions more people to be alive and to live 2 to 3 times longer. And so even with all the negative things you mentioned, it seemed like the world is getting significantly better based on the criteria you mentioned of preserving life. We have significantly more human life than ever, and we give them more quality of life than ever. And so, like, even in World War II during and the Depression when uh, quality of life for many people was very, very bad. It was still better than pretty much the vast majority of humans 200 years prior than that, at the best of times. So even given
Yeah.
these atrocities that we have, it seems like there's a clear standard that we're making massive strides of progress. When even at the worst of our current stage, we're still doing better than everybody 200 years ago.
Yes, and I agree with you. Um, there's some areas there where I think there's agreement between us. I'm not suggesting that progress in technology is a bad thing. Um, there's always been progress in technology, and that's always been beneficial to society and to the world as a whole. It's better that we now have tractors that can pull massive implements behind them to create massive farms. I used to farm when I was a young man with my grandfather, and so I got to drive these big tractors and plow up fields and all of that. Then having to have two oxen, with a single plow that it takes you forever to just do one row. We agree there. And in fact, I would say that the Christian worldview um, supports this notion of the development of technology because God gave us minds that are constantly learning and developing and increasing in our knowledge, increasing in our abilities, and it's a reflection of the fact that we are kind of as it were mini creators. God created us in His image, and therefore, we reflect something of God Himself, in that we ourselves are creators. We create works, great works of art, of music. We make use of math and science and technology to do amazing things. Nonetheless, I think where you and I might differ is that technology doesn't change human hearts. And, you know, you're always going to have evil in the world as long as we live in this cursed world. And we're never going to eradicate evil. We're never going to arrive at a utopia on our own. Because I don't think we're capable of that. Because you're always going to have people who are interfere, and you're always going to have conflicts between different ideologies that will prevent such a utopia from taking place because it's human nature. It's our nature to be a conflict with one another, and it has been from day one. And so technology isn't going to solve the problem of the human heart. The problem of the human heart can only be solved when people are properly related to their God, to the God who created us all. And so that's why I suggest we can't find our hope in technology or some notion of progress. And I don't know those statistics. I'd have to read Pinker's book to see how he frames all that. But the fact of the matter remains that the 20th century was a pretty atrocious time in the world for many many people. And I do want to go back to one other point, and then I've got to go because I've got to take care of some things here. But I wanted to go back to one point that you made earlier, and maybe you can clarify what you meant by this. But you were talking about stories or whatever, life in general would be better if we had options. And my view of free will, if I call it that, doesn't deny that we don't have options, that we don't have alternative paths set before us, but that there are determining factors that will decisively determine which path a person will take. So there's that issue. But you said it would be better to have options, but for some situations we don't have options. The slaves didn't have much many options. The Jews during the Holocaust didn't have a whole lot of options. They were confronted with evil in a compelling and coercive manner that caused them to face the reality that I am the victim of evil and I can't escape this reality. So they didn't have those options, and I'm not sure that's what you mean, but that's what I'm thinking. You have situations where people are in the midst of an evil environment over which they have no control, and over which they are in a situation where coercion is taking place. And yet, how do those people escape those conditions of evil? And what I find interesting is that there's always amazing stories where people who were under that kind of intense affliction have found hope through the Christian story, if you will. And I think of slaves, all the great Negro spirituals that grew out of the 1800s were derived from slaves who found hope in the Christian faith, even while they had quote unquote Christian slave owners, that were oppressing them. A lot of the Negro spirituals actually grew out of the revivalistic preaching of a man named George Whitefield, who was instrumental in what is known as the First Great Awakening in the 1740s and 1780s, and they took his sermons and turned them into songs that they then sang as an oppressed people, much like the Jews were oppressed by the Egyptians as slaves before God brought redemption to them and established them, in ancient Israel. But, so the point is that even those who experience great affliction and great tragedy and great crises in their lives have experienced hope. And I think the Bible says that the hope for those people is actually greater than if they had not experienced these deep tragedies in their lives. And I think that is the hope of the Christian faith, or what we call the gospel, that is centered around what Christ did to save people, to redeem people from sin and death and evil and hell and Satan and all these evil things, that either we perpetrate because we are all rebels, or have been perpetrated against us because we're also victims. And that is where I believe true hope lies. And that's the Christian story. And it's glorious for those who have been pulled out of such affliction, because it makes the end game all the much more powerful and meaningful to those people, because they went through such a crisis of evil.
Right. So what
And
I
that's
meant.
my point.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
what I meant, you asked about what I meant when I said people should be given choice. I was talking more about like God himself giving us a choice. So before we come to heaven as children or whatever, God gives you the choice. Like, would you like to go to my earth where I have all of this pain and suffering and death and Jesus happened, where you can go through this trials and tribulations and get to that retribution, redemption at the end, where you have all of those benefits you mentioned? Or would you like to opt out and be like, no, you just go to your old video game world or something?
Okay, I see
And
what you're saying.
so it's kind of like
Yeah.
the ticket at the movie theater. God gives you the option. Would you like to go to the Lord of the Rings where you can be stabbed by the ring wraith? Or would you like to be like, no, I'm going to go play Star Wars or something?
Right,
And
right.
if God had done that, then it would have been an infinitely better movie, a better story, because now you still have all of those trials and tribulations, and you still have all of the rewards at the end. You still have all of the personal growth. But you have one additional thing there, is that you got the option to choose to go to the movie. Well, you weren't forced to go to the movie.
Yeah.
So if that one option was added to this story, then it would have been an infinitely better story than forcing people into the movie theater, like your wife example, just forcing her into the movie theater to suffer through it without her choice. That one thing would have made it significantly more moral. And so the people who are being coerced here, who I think are the greatest immoral forcing people, is when God forced people to live here without their consent and didn't give them the option to be like, would you like to be a part of this world? Would you like to buy a movie ticket to Lord of the Rings? Or would you like to not go?
So are you suggesting that we should have had the option to be nihilists?
Nihilism is like the position that there's no value or something. Like, I'm saying God himself, if just grant Christianity is true, if God himself just gave us the option, you can go to the world as God designed it, or God could give you a world of whatever you kind of wanted, give you like a checklist. What would you like in your world? Pizza. I want pizza. Murder. Nope, we're going to get rid of the murder. I don't want that one. No rape. No, I'll do without that one. And so you can go to this world of your own kind of design, and he gives you the option. Would you like to go to world A, world B? It's up to you. Here's the benefits of world A that I designed for you. You can go through all the trials and tribulations, or you can just, pizza world.
Right. No, I'm thinking of Albert Camus, who said the only significant philosophical question in the world is suicide. Because if we live in a world where we feel like we weren't asked to be in this world, then that to me would suggest, well, you don't want to be in this world. So then the most significant question for you would be whether or not you commit suicide. So
Well, that would,
would that be an option then? So I mean,
if
people, do you believe people who live with that worldview saying, "Well, God placed me," or whether you believe in God or not, I'm placed in a world where I didn't ask to be placed in here. I don't want to really be in here because I don't find any meaningful reason to be here. So the next question then would be suicide. Would you agree with that?
sort of, I think that many people do commit suicide exactly for that reason, that they're forced to be in a life where they didn't get any choice and they're filled with suffering that they didn't get any choice of. But I don't think, again, suicide isn't a moral option. It's an immoral option to be forced to make, because if you're placed in a world where you didn't choose, full of suffering you didn't ask for by someone else, you're literally just a slave. So whatever placed you there is immoral. The moral option would be just to snap your fingers and say, I'm going to my own world. That would be the moral option. So not suicide as much as suicide would
So,
be a...
but that doesn't exist for anyone. I mean, do you know that that
Right.
exists for someone? Can somebody snap their fingers and go into a different world?
No, that's why this world is immoral. Whoever created it must be immoral, because they didn't give us that option.
Hmm. So how do you justify that it was immoral? On what basis?
Well,
What
I'm a
is your
moral
ground
realist.
for saying something is immoral?
I'm a moral realist. So I'm like, most philosophers are atheists, like
Hmm.
70 something percent, but they also believe in moral realism, objective morality. So I
Sure,
believe there is an objective
and
morality.
I would be a moral realist as well.
Yeah, like pretty much all
So,
Christians are moral. It's strange
right.
to find a
So
Christian who's not a moral realist.
the question is, where do you ground moral obligations? Why should I love my neighbor and not kill him?
Yeah, I think that morality is grounded in nature. Just I think there is a, like, I imagine you would say that morality is grounded in God's nature of some kind, something like that. I would say morality is grounded in nature's nature. There is some...
So what is it about nature that grounds morality?
I'd say it's like a law of physics kind of thing, an emergent, higher order emergent property, which is the
Okay,
moral
so
property.
what if there were a law that said that killing was okay?
I'd say there isn't one, but if it did say that, then that would be moral. So kind of like, what if God said killing was okay? Well, he wouldn't do
Okay,
that, but if he
so
did...
if that's the case, then you're suggesting that there is something transcendent about these moral things that aren't tied to a specific law that says, yeah, killing is wrong. Like that would be equivalent to the law of gravity or something like that.
Yes. If I don't know if I'd call laws of physics transcendent, or transcendent of us maybe, but
No, I'm not even suggesting laws of physics are transcendent,
yeah,
but I'm
so
suggesting that morality is transcendent.
I'd say it's more like a law of physics. So I'd say it's like fundamental
Yeah.
grounds of what makes nature. So I don't think I'd call it transcendent, but I would
So,
call it
but
more like a law
we
of
could live in
physics.
a world where the laws of physics or the laws of morality that are like the laws of physics were such that it's okay to kill your neighbor.
It's logically possible, but all of the evidence indicates that's not the case. So it'd be like, it's possible we live in a world that was created 5 minutes ago, but there's
Mhm.
no evidence to support that.
Would you say that moral laws or moral obligations are personal in nature?
No, they are expressed in things that are personal. So, like, gravity isn't made of mass, but it affects things with mass.
So, do we expect like a leaf on a tree to show love and compassion toward dirt on the ground?
No, morality is, again, a thing that affects minds and consciousnesses, just like gravity affects mass, but it doesn't have mass.
Okay,
So,
so you would say that we're moral beings, but a tree is not a moral being.
yes, sort of.
Okay. So I'm still asking the question, where does that moral consciousness come from, and why doesn't it affect, if it comes from nature, why does it only affect human beings?
So I tried to answer that before. Gravity has no mass. Gravity is the curvature of space-time. It doesn't have any
Right.
mass, but it affects things with mass. So
Hmm.
this is a common thing. It's called a composition division fallacy. The things that it affects doesn't need to be inside itself. So like the thing that affects consciousnesses with morality doesn't need to be conscious, just like gravity affects things with mass, but gravity doesn't have any mass. So the law of physics that affects consciousness that has morality isn't itself conscious. There's no reason to think it would be conscious.
Yeah. So getting back to the question of whether or not morality has a personal relation, would you agree that moral principles largely impact interpersonal relationships?
Yes, just like gravity affects objects with mass attract.
Right. So morality is largely conducted in the realm of interpersonal relationships
Yes.
between. We'll confine it to human beings. We'll set aside animals for a moment, but you would say that the morality is primarily conducted in the realm of interpersonal relationships.
Yes.
So would it not suggest to you that whatever grounds morality would involve interpersonal relationships?
No. So like I could say whatever gravity is something that affects objects with mass. Would that suggest that whatever grounds gravity has mass?
Yeah. Um, yeah, it's a different question
Well,
because
it's
you're dealing with a material world.
well the
Um,
question
and
has
I- and
it's the
I
structure.
think that there is a metaphysical grounding even for the material world, but that's a different kind of argument.
Well, it's the
Um,
exact same
and
argument.
I think you're comparing apples to oranges at that point.
Well, yeah, so it's a composition division
Yeah,
fallacy is what it's called. It's when you say that the thing that is affecting some interaction must be in the grounds of whatever the interaction is made of. So like obviously gravity is not made of mass. Curvature of space-time is not made of mass, but it
right,
affects things that have mass. So objects with mass attract.
right. I
But
see
you
what you're saying.
but you couldn't say
Yeah,
that because objects with mass attract, therefore gravity must be made of
right,
mass. In the same
right.
way, moral things, moral interactions attract between minds or whatever. You couldn't say that whatever grounds morality is a mind.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I would disagree, but I think we can't ground morality in anything that is other than personal, conscious, moral. Having a moral component, and and if we believe that, as moral realism would suggest to us, that we have invariant moral obligations, that there is an objective standard of morality,
I would agree.
and that differs from laws of physics. I think in significant ways because we don't have that standard of morality present in this world. So where does it come from? Um, and we know that there is a perfect world. I mean, we can conceive of a perfect world where there is nothing but love and no war and no killing and no murder and no hatred and all of that. But we don't live in such a world. Um, and so, where does the notion of such a world come from? Because it's not one that we live in. Um, anyway, I believe ultimately it points to a personal God, you know, with a moral consciousness that's reflected in creatures that are created just like him in that regard, and that interpersonal relationships between humans reflect the Trinitarian interpersonal relationships between the persons of the Trinity. And therefore, I think morality is only properly grounded in the Trinitarian God of Christianity, because only such a God could be moral, right? If you had a Unitarian God, how does a Unitarian God who doesn't have a need to create anything, how does he express love?
Well, I don't understand
I
how
don't believe it's
any
possible to express love unless there's a lover and a loved, right? So just think in terms of a man and a wife, right? So husband and wife. Husband loves his wife, right? So you have one who is extending love and one who's receiving love. Okay. So in order for the moral conditions for love to exist, you have to have a lover and a loved. Otherwise, love has no meaning, right? So that already suggests that morality presupposes a community of interpersonal relationships, where something like love can be expressed. Well, where does that notion come from? Well, if we're created in the image of God, and God is a Trinitarian being, the Father extends love to the Son loves the Father, and there's a context in the interpersonal intertrinitarian relationships where moral actions are expressed or moral sentiments are expressed, and I think that's from my.
Oh, you cut out. I can't hear you. Your sound cut out. I can't hear you.
Because I gotta go do some other
Oh, there you go.
things.
Gotcha. Now I can hear you. Um, so yeah, I don't think you need a loving relationship to ground morality. I think that there could be essentially like, if you think of a Buddhist monk in a universe on his own versus Hitler in a universe on his own, he could have a loving personality even without any other people there. So the essence of the nature of the thing can be what grounds morality. And I don't understand how a God could ground it, because I think the Euthyphro dilemma is a good way to illustrate that a consciousness can't ground morality. Is something good because God consciously deemed it so? Or does God deem it so because it's moral based off of some other standard? And it seems like it can't be because God consciously deems it so, because then morality is arbitrary. So you could say it's grounded in God's nature or something, and I'm fine with that. But it can't be a conscious decision. So consciousness can't ground morality. It has to be
Yeah,
some essence of a nature. And that part I agree with. So I can just say it's the essence of a nature, like a law of physics nature. It doesn't need to be a conscious
right.
decision.
No, yeah, you're bringing up the Euthyphro dilemma, and I think that's easily answered, and you just answered it. That God commands that which reflects His own character, because He is a perfectly moral God who loves perfectly, who's perfectly righteous and moral in every respect, with absolute perfection, and He can be nothing other than that. So then He that forms the basis by which he can command others,
Right.
because
That means you don't need
that's
consciousness.
yeah. So listen, I have to go. I've got to go to another meeting.
Yep.
So I've enjoyed this conversation, but I have to cut it off.
Yep. Thanks for coming on. Really appreciate it. And I will let you go. Have a
Okay,
nice day.
Tom, enjoyed it. Take care.
See ya. All right, guys. After showtime. Discord. After show Discord. Where's my? I don't have a YouTube up right now. Thank you for the super chat, Lawson Harrison. Appreciate it as always. All right, let's see here. Go to my YouTube. Go to the chat. http / Discord IL/TJump. I think that's correct. Pin message. Let's see if that one worked. Does that work? Maybe that's not right. I don't know. Control C. Control V. Nope, that's not right. Damn it. Let's try this. Pin Replaced pin message. There we go. Now it's linked. Let's go back to the Discord. Hello, Edwa. How's it going? Edwa's gone. Chance, how's it going?
It's going great. How are you today, man?
Pretty good. Very sleepy. Thank you for the super chat, Cosmic. I love it when you let them talk a lot in the course challenge, then more and more until they lost. Yeah, I'm doing pretty good. Very sleepy because I woke up early for this.
Yeah, plus, it's like a cloudy ass day here, so
Yeah.
I'm sleepy as hell too.
Where are you? I think it's cloudy here, Minnesota.
I'm in Wisconsin. I'm actually a couple of like an hour east of you.
Oh wow. Just come down and get some coffee sometime and not make me drive.
Oh, fuck yeah. No, I'd rather go to Minneapolis than you come to the middle of the swamp.
Go to those cornfields. Like...
Exactly. Yeah, no, without a doubt. I've actually been pretty interested in you starting this atheist church stuff, and it's kind of got the ideas flowing on like a community center, at least in the big city, Milwaukee here.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. So I'm trying to set it up in multiple cities. So the goal, I'm still like trying to figure out what the best way to file the taxes is, because taxes take like 9 months to file and you have to do like a lot of work. Been thinking about getting professional help with it, but it's like $5,000 to do that. And it's going to be a struggle to do like a lot of it. So I'm still trying to figure that out. But yeah, I definitely want to do that. That's my main goal in life right now.
Yeah, I think it's a huge community help. I think it's something that's definitely needed.
Yeah, for sure. And I'd love to do like community housing, get housing for the atheist church people so we can like decrease the cost of living. That would be the best part. And then have like a community center would be awesome where you could play basketball, host debates, and do lectures and things. That would be cool.
Oh yeah. Yeah, no, I'm all about that life, and it's kind of got the ideas turning down here. So I was gonna, talk to my stepdad's really good at like opening up businesses and stuff like that. So I was gonna kind of consult him about getting something going. What would the first process be in this opening up something like that, and see where it goes from there.
Yeah, it'd be awesome.
But it seems like, yeah.
Yeah, go for it. Like I think we should
sure.
try as many avenues as possible. So definitely ask your dad for help for sure.
Oh, without a doubt.
How many people online today?
I presume it's the time.
Yep. Would I ever go on the Atheist Experience as a co-host? Sure. Angels from Africa asks. I would do that. Like I have no problem with Matt or anybody else. I think that they're wrong on their social justice stuff, but I don't have any problem with them personally.
Quick, because of the church you want to create. Do you think about creating a church in other countries too? Like I'm in Germany, Berlin right now.
Yes, I would like to create a global church thing where it's kind of like expands into all the different countries, different states. I'd like to make it a global thing if possible.
Do you have a name for it?
Atheist Church, pretty much. That's what I got.
I don't know. Maybe that could be taken in some countries. Maybe.
Yeah, maybe.
Maybe something more creative. I don't know.
The Church of the Chair.
Oh yes, maybe the churches. Yeah, all hail the chair.
Church of the Chair's good. I like that.
Yeah, you have to sit comfortably to find God, not.
It is mandatory that we put lazy boys in all public spaces.
Sounds reasonable.
Tim West, would they let you on the show given the history? I doubt it. I don't think Matt would let me on the show because he doesn't like my anti-social justice stances.
Is there a specific one that you're in conflict with him about more than others?
Well, I'm not in conflict with him. More like he's in conflict with me. So he doesn't. He thinks he said I was a bigot or something. So he doesn't like my positions at all.
Could you tell us maybe the difference? Like he maybe tries to point out between you and him.
Well, I don't know. He's never like talked about specifically, but like I've done debates against like this. Is saying trans women are not women always transphobic? I did that debate. I did the super straight debate. I did the all lives matter debate. And so he's super SJWE, so he doesn't like that. I don't think he's never brought up any arguments or anything against my position.
Maybe you guys should debate it if he's up to it. I don't know.
Maybe.
The problem is you both want to be paid, so like a third party has to pay.
Yes.
I don't think he would. I don't think that's like those sort of positions are something that he just draws a line on and wouldn't debate. Do you know what I mean? Like,
no, so Don,
whether it's considered right or wrong.
Well, Don Fullman offered to pay him, and he agreed to it, but me and Don couldn't come to agreement on where we should do it because I want to do it on my channel. So he agreed to it.
Fair enough.
What?
Why not just do it on modern day debate?
Because social justice debates are really, really hard. So like I get a lot of kickback against social justice debates. I get a lot of hate mail. And so it's not worth it for me to do it on a different channel other than mine.
Is it not something you could just mirror to both of yours, or how does that work?
Well, the problem is that I would get a lot of hate, but not a lot of support. So unless it was on my channel and people were actually drawn to my channel as the primary source, then it wouldn't get me anything. I just get a bunch of hate. So it would be a lot more work than it was worth unless it was only on my channel or primarily on my channel.
Yeah, I'll confess ignorance. I have no idea how any of that works.
I don't know. Maybe if it's an important topic, you have to go out and risk it someday. Maybe like first try to understand Matt's argument better, or maybe try to guess which positions you have he might disagree with.
Well, I've never heard him make arguments against what I said, so that's the problem. And since my arguments are more not like the other arguments of people who take those positions, because I don't really agree with those positions. It's more just arguing against the arguments, and so no one's ever responded to my arguments themselves. Like Vosh just said, I just define people as being transphobic. There's no logic behind it. I just define people as it. Like, well, that's not really logical. And then same thing with Jangles. Jangles like, I just define people as transphobic. Well, it's not coherent. Like you have to actually give a justification for why you're using that definition or that word. So no one's actually responded to my argument. Is the problem.
I don't know. Maybe go out of a limb, try to search their videos through, and maybe make just a video where you go through one of them and try to find like everything is recorded nowadays. So maybe you find
Well, I've already done that. They
where
never
made an
answer. They never answer the question. That's the problem.
Ah, okay. I didn't see that video then.
I've done like 3 or 4 debates on the topic.
No, I don't mean debate. What I mean is like a pre-recorded video where you search, like in background, you search through their videos and find where they make an argument about that topic, whatever topic it is, and then you basically just like many other YouTubers do that, where they just review content about someone else and say what they think about it.
I've done a few of those on the Discord review things. The vid you want debunked, I think is what it's titled. Vid you want debunked.
Oh, okay.
But again, they just don't answer any of the questions I'm asking. That's the problem, is that my arguments are pretty unique, even on the theistic ones. So going through other people's videos, they never answer the questions I'm asking. That's the problem.
I didn't inform myself about your arguments, but maybe I have to look into it. I actually don't really know what your stance on trans stuff is, so I have to look into that.
Well, my argument is more that the left is using the same arguments that Christians are using. They're using the same bad arguments and bad logic to criticize other people's positions. So they say anybody who says trans women aren't women is bigoted. And my argument is that no, it's not. They can just disagree. So like if they think that the appropriate way to use gender is synonymous with sex, which is perfectly legitimate, then they're not being bigoted. They just think there's a better way to use the words. And so there's no way for the people on the left, or they don't differentiate between disagreement and bigotry and just say anybody who disagrees is bigoted. And that's the exact same thing Christians say. Well, if you don't, like if you think in evolution, well, you just want to sin. It's evil. It's by the devil. And so their argument that the people on the left use is exactly the same as the arguments that the religious people use is that, oh, you're just evil if you disagree, which is not an argument. And so that's the problem, is that people on the left use the exact same arguments as Christians. And that's what I'm objecting to, not specific, like trans rights issues. I don't really care about. I care about the fact that the people on the left are using the exact same silly arguments that the religious people are using.
I agree to a degree. So the thing is that there is a difference in the perceived sex of someone and the actual sex. Let's just use the word like thing. And people try to use the word gender as the perceived one.
Some people. So that's the point. Is some people. And some people don't.
Yeah, I understand. And some people don't. As you say, some people don't. And yeah, there's like a disconnect between them. And yes, I agree that the left should just say, yeah, I don't care how you word it, but there's two things we are talking about. And yeah, maybe they should do that more.
So like some people bring up the criticism of, oh, well, you can just make up a word like, say, humans are only white. And so if you're not white, you're not a human. That was Udolf put that in the chat. That's not analogous. So like sex and gender, the vast majority of humans have been using sex and gender to mean synonymous for like the vast majority of human species. So it's not a bigoted, made up definition to be bigoted. It's just the way the word has been used in most cultures. So if people are in the cultures where it's used in that way, it is in no way bigoted. It's just the way they were brought up using the words, how they find utility of the words in their culture. And so it's a false analogy to try and compare that to a word that's literally been invented specifically to be bigoted. So,
but to be fair, the many people you discuss it with, even if you are like, if you don't phrase it perfectly, they won't acknowledge that there are two things. And like even if you have like a normal lefty debate where one says where one says there are two things and the other says gender and sex are the same. The one who says gender and sex are the same, they also don't acknowledge that, yes, okay, for me, gender and sex means the same, but I understand that you mean that there are two things. And so it goes both ways.
Well, I don't think so, because the only people who are saying, like, the people who are saying it's only one thing, gender and sex are the same thing, is saying that it corresponds to something in reality. It's like a physical state, chromosomes, gametes, whatever. And the people who are saying it's sex and gender are separate things are saying it's a psychological state. And so there's a legitimate reason to disagree and think that psychological states are not as legitimate as empirical facts about the world. And so if you use a word to represent a psychological state, it's less legitimate than one that represents a physical state. And so that's perfectly legitimate disagreement to have. So that's fine. The problem is that if you say they're bigoted because of that, that's the problem. Like, it's totally fine to disagree about the word usage. That's okay.
Yeah.
The problem is when you call someone a bigot because they disagree, that's not okay.
So
if
I don't
just
think,
to clarify, I wanted to clarify. So if the people on the left were just saying, I think your definition of gender is wrong, and I think this definition is right, that's a perfectly legitimate argument. I think that's a good argument to have, but it's not a good argument to say you're bigoted because you use the definition differently. That's not a good argument.
Yeah. So one thing I want to add to is, and then I'm shutting up, is I don't think like you can easily say something is purely psychological and something is purely body dependent or DNA dependent. These things like mix and mesh, like our psychology is like an emergent property out of our body, and therefore I think like also this perceived sex isn't entirely psychological. There can be DNA components, there can be things. It doesn't only mean like this. It's just a social thing.
Well, that doesn't matter. So like we know for a fact that there are neurological correlates to conservatism and to Christianity. It doesn't matter. Those are still ideologies. It would still be wrong to treat conservatism as the same as being I don't know, African or American or something. There's still a substantive difference between the ideologies, which are primarily constructed in the mind, and actual physical traits, which aren't. So the fact that there are certain psychological tendencies or that are associated with biology and neurological states doesn't make it not an ideology. It's still an ideology. There's still a substantive difference between that and actual physical states.
I don't know. I know a few trans people, and it isn't like they just like, it isn't like they were brought up or like their environment pushed them into being the other gender. They have like a deep urge in them that something is wrong. It isn't.
Well, that doesn't make sense. That literally doesn't make sense. So like the association to another gender, that's all just cultural traits. So like if you like the color pink rather than the color blue, or you like being more compassionate, if you associate with the traits that are associated with another gender, that's pretty much all sociology. Like there's not like an objective womanness biology that is in your brain. Like that's not a thing. What transness is associating with the cultural tendencies of the other gender, which are cultural tendencies.
Or not, right? It goes both ways.
What? You mean like
you've
associating
got, like,
with the cultural opinions?
Tendencies? You've got historical opinions of what male and female are, and then you've got those opinions changing over time.
Right.
So you've got some people that identify with them and some that don't.
Yes. But the point here is that
English dandies back in the 1800s, leather, thigh-high boots, tights, frills, lace, makeup, wigs, powdered.
Yeah. The point is that those what you associate with is a cultural thing, and so the fact that someone is trans and they associate with the cultural things that are synonymous with a particular sex has nothing to do with biology. It's not like they biologically are designed to like pink rather than blue. That's just no. It's the fact that culturally they identify with the things that are associated in our culture with the opposite sex, which is fine, but that's not a biological thing. Like obviously they're biologically wired differently, but it's not that they're biologically wired to like pink.
Yeah, I think it's more a pushback against the fact that genders have largely been like a societal construct, and they're basically saying, I don't accept your description and I will insert one of my own.
Well, also another thing too, the term dandy is only quote unquote seen as pejorative in our day. Had you been called a dandy back in the time when it was used, it would have been synonymous with
Male.
single or male or
Yeah, an
available,
aristocratic,
right?
high-class male.
Yeah. Hey, TJump, I got a question.
Sure.
So there's been a kind of a running joke since the pandemic about specifically white males pretending to identify as a vaccinated black female, right?
Haven't heard that one.
You've never heard that one. So
I've heard
funny,
the pretending to be like a black female midget Muslim or something. That one I've heard.
Right. So since the pandemic, it's kind of I identify as vaccinated. Do you think that a lot of the logic that is used behind the defense of the transgender movement can kind of be reduced to those types of
As
in
a
essence, if somebody
parody.
could change their gender, as a parody almost. Do you think that?
Yeah, so it's similar to like the spaghetti monster in that you're taking the same methodology essentially and applying it to a parody argument that is against their ideology. And I think that's a perfectly legitimate form of criticism. So that's a fine argument to make, I think. I don't know if it would be right or not.
Well, it can't be right because vaccinated or unvaccinated is a literal physical description.
Well, no, that's the point. That's the parody that it's making, is that gender and sex are meant to represent chromosomes and gametes. It's a physical state in the worldview of people who are more on the right. And so saying that you identify as woman is like saying you identify as vaccinated. It's a physical state that you do or don't have. That's why it's a parody. And that's the disagreement, is that people on the left are saying that gender isn't a physical state, it's a psychological state. And so they're changing what was typically no, it's not. It's just saying that they find that this usage of the word is more accurate. This usage has been more taught in their societies. And so because they think this word is a better way to use the word because it corresponds to something in reality as opposed to a psychological state, or empirical rather than conceptual. And so it's like if we said, there's lots of examples, I can't think of them at the top of my head right now, but if we try to change the meaning of a word to refer to something that was used to refer to a physical thing, and then we're going to make it a conceptual thing, that's usually a degradation of the word. It's less legitimate. Whereas if we take conceptual things and make them refer to physical things, that's an improvement to the word. So like free will. We thought free will was this magical libertarian thing. We discovered that wasn't real, so now we use it to be compatibilism. That's an improvement of the word. Or universe or time. Time we thought was a conceptual thing. It's and then we discovered it's a physical field in space. And so it went from a conceptual thing to a physical thing. And so when we make words try to correspond to physical realities rather than conceptual realities, that's usually seen as an improvement, rather than going the other way around. When they refer to physical things, making them refer to conceptual things seems to be a degradation. And so the people on the right are legitimate to think of this as a criticism of the way we use gender, is that it's degrading the term from a physical state of gametes and chromosomes to a psychological state, which is less legitimate in many ways.
If they left it confined to a pure physical description, then that would be one thing. But this is used as the root argument to build a broader picture of what a real man or a real woman is. And so, I mean, it's kind of like a half truth. You're both right and wrong.
Well, I think that's a slippery slope. So like the fact, this is another one of the arguments that's commonly used, that it could lead to people being bigoted or whatever. So the fact that if we use words in this way,
bigoted.
Well, no. So it's again, I'm just doing another parody. So if this could lead to people saying this is the correct way to be a right or wrong woman, this usage of the words, therefore this usage of the words is evil or something or bad, that's a slippery slope. Like the fact that some people may use this usage to justify other bigoted positions or other wrong positions doesn't mean that this usage of the words is wrong in and of itself. That's a slippery slope. So the fact that one of the common arguments on the left is that, oh, well, this is used by Nazis and bigots to be bigoted against trans people. Well, that doesn't matter. If the argument is still legitimate, then you can't say because it's being used by bad people, therefore the argument is bad. That doesn't work. That's a fallacious argument. So even if people use this in a bad way or something to support their bigoted perspective, that doesn't mean that it's an illegitimate position to hold in the first place. It's still completely legitimate to say, no, I think that gender and sex refer to physical states of gametes and chromosomes. And I think that's a more legitimate usage than psychological states. And even if some bad people tend to use that for even more, or like worse, bad, bigoted reasons, that doesn't make it the original statement wrong. It's just a slippery slope. That's the same thing that Christians do. They say that we can't teach evolution in schools because that'll lead people away from God. Like, that doesn't matter. That doesn't mean it's wrong. Like, the fact that some bad people will use it doesn't mean it's wrong. Or the communists were atheists, therefore atheism is bad. Like, the fact that China and Russia used atheism as a part of their ideology doesn't mean atheism is the source of all of the murders. It's just a slippery slope.
The fallacy, right?
Yep.
It's also kind of ironic because although they used it as part of their ideology, were they actually really atheist, or did they just sort of supplant their great leader in the position of God and still have kind of a theist aspect towards their ideology? If that makes sense.
Yeah. So you can say that the attribution of the mass murders was more to the dogmatic acceptance of a particular voice or a particular leader over all others. And that is synonymous with religion in that it accepts a particular voice over all others. And that acceptance of dogma is the cause, which is a religious trait rather than simply the ideology of atheism.
I think North Korea is a great example of that, because they literally supplement the great leader and say that he was anointed by God and all that kind of stuff. Like, they literally put him in the position of a living God on earth, right?
Yeah, I think they said that the necrocracy, where the dead guy is still the leader of the country, is the first necrocracy, as Hitchens put it.
Yeah.
Thanatocracy.
Thanatocracy.
I believe it's.
Yeah, it was one of the terms he coined was a thanatocracy.
Like Thanos from Marvel.
Yeah, well, death. Thanos, death.
I think the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia as well. They.
Yes, that is another good
to
example.
point to as atheists, but they clearly stated that they were anointed by God. So how can they have been atheists? It doesn't make any sense, right?
Yep.
And then again, you've got that weird issue that goes back and forth between people who view any rejection of any god as an atheistic position, but it doesn't exclude you from having a belief in a god. Just it becomes claim specific. That's where that meme about 4,200, gods, and I disbelieve them all. You disbelieve.
Yeah, that actually goes to the origin of the word atheism. The Romans convicted Christians of being atheists because atheism was simply a rejection of the Roman gods or tithing to the Roman gods. So it doesn't. If you think
historically, it does seem to be like an academic usage was common then, because it was the standard go-to was that you did believe in some sort of god. You just didn't perhaps believe in mine.
Yeah, more or less. Christian Prince Ears, how do you explain the argument that consciousness exists only in humans? That confuses me. Yeah, I think that's more just human exceptionalism, the speciesism. There's no foundation in biology to think that only humans have consciousness. We think that all mammals do pretty much.
It's kind of an easy one to address too, because you just get them to nail down what they define as consciousness. And then you're probably going to find that quality exists in other species. So
well, usually they just special plead for like things that only humans can do. Like, oh, we can only introspect and do logic and math and stuff. Animals can't do that.
Couldn't an argument be made that among humans that perhaps we're the only ones who are conscious that we are conscious? but even that's dispute or debatable because we
Well,
can't
it's refuted
verify
because,
whether or not another species is aware of their own awareness.
well,
Yeah.
yeah, there are tests that we do to determine whether a species knows can recognize themselves, sort of thing.
Well, that's different. So, like, essentially, people make the argument that higher order associations of consciousness are the only thing that counts as consciousness, which is silly. It's like clearly the fact that we can do higher order analysis of relationships between how our consciousness exists is a kind of consciousness, but it's not the only kind. Like, obviously, babies still have consciousness. They can't do that. But so it doesn't. It's very silly to think that the higher order relations in consciousness are really the only kind of consciousness.
Yeah, because infants don't even recognize or differentiate themselves from their environment till about 18 months. And arguments could be made that really intelligent species like dolphins or perhaps primates are aware of their own awareness. But
I thought object
I think
permanence was more around 6 months.
Well, those are different things. So object permanence and seeing other people as being there and seeing yourself as being there are separate things. So like the thing he's talking about is recognizing yourself in a mirror, essentially recognizing your own consciousness.
Okay.
And then
Yeah, because I was
recognizing
talking about what Piaget was mentioning about his whole organic epistemology and how babies learn the idea that they don't really possess the idea of the concept of reality, anything existing if they're not looking at it.
the
They
peekaboo
don't have that.
peekaboo thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So they literally can't form a belief because they don't have a map of reality yet. They only have a map of meaning. They don't have one of the external world. They don't think that exists. So if you want to have a belief, it's like,
I wouldn't say that. I think they still grant the external world exists. They just don't understand that it's still there when they're not looking at it. Like it can only
that's
be
usually how one
formed.
defines the external world, right? It's the stuff that stays when you don't look at it.
No, it's there. If like you can say the external world is in front of you, like right now my TV is in front of me, and I can be not aware of any of the other things anywhere else, and I still believe in the external world. I just don't believe it's very big.
What about when you're having a dream? You're aware of a world that doesn't really exist.
It exists conceptually. That's one of the valid definitions of exist, is something existing with objective being.
I don't know what you mean.
Well,
so what about dreams?
Objective would mean to exist independent of the mind.
Yeah. So I mean, like even if you're dreaming, you can think it's the external world. So, like, if you're in a dream and you see, I don't know, a unicorn and you think it's the external world, you still believe in the external world, even if it's not what you're seeing.
Well, people still say that dreams and ideas exist. They just exist in the mind, right?
Well, the question is do you believe in the external world? And you can be in a dream where you see a unicorn, which isn't the external world, but you can still believe it's the external world. So it's still in objective reality because it's a part of your mind, but it's not a part of the external world.
Interesting. I've always delineated them slightly differently. Like mental constructs were things that had objective being because they were of the mind. And then there was objective reality, which was stuff not of the mind. And so if you look up the definition of exists, that's why it says something that has objective being or reality.
Well, I'd say objective reality is everything, including all of your thoughts. Those exist in objective reality, but it's subjective in that it doesn't exist independent of your mind. It's not objective, but it's a part of objective reality.
So would it cause confusion to say that dreams exist in the mind, or
No.
it would be less precise than something else?
I think it's fine to say dreams exist within the mind, and they exist subjectively. It's a subjective experience.
But everybody has dreams, so doesn't that make it objective?
Well, your dreams exist in reality. They exist in objective reality, but they're only accessible subjectively through the mind. So if your mind didn't exist, they wouldn't exist.
You should ask a theist sometime, TJump, if God dreams, because technically, to them, it's a mind.
It depends
So,
which god. So, like in
I
Hinduism, the Brahmin does dream. So, literally, the yugas and the Kali yugas are the states of the god Brahmin being awake and asleep. So, yes, in Hinduism, this is all God's dream.
And in Hinduism, they'd also say that God dreams every possible dream simultaneously as well. If you get into the non-dualist Advaita Vedanta traditions and whatnot.
Doesn't one of them say that if God ever woke up, we would disappear?
Yes, that's the same one.
They all say that, yeah.
Tim West, does language exist in reality? Yes. Do abstract objects exist in reality? No. Language is a concept in the minds. Concepts in the minds exist in reality. Abstract objects are references to what the words mean, which don't exist in reality. Those are just things we made up.
Yeah, which is the main argument against stuff like Platonism and universals, right? These are constructs of the mind. They don't exist independently.
Yeah, I think the main argument against Platonism is that it's how do Platonic objects interact with the world we see around us, and there's no way to explain that.
like what things are and what we name them.
What?
Like a cup being a cup, it's not like inherently a cup. We just call it a cup.
Yes.
Yeah, there's no inherent definitions.
But abstracts are usually like squares, circles, shapes. Like if there is a cupness, a thing that made something a cup, the essence of cup, that would be an abstract. Stinblin. Do you argue for atheism because your side, Soros, Illuminati, etc., pays better? I wish. Theism pays way better than atheism. Like if you want to be a theist on YouTube, you'll make a lot more money than being an atheist on YouTube.
Yeah, it's one of the things I used as a tagline once, is the fact that as a member of the clergy project, if you were to convince me that a God exists, I would go onto the speaking tour and make millions. And I would agree to split with you the money, the millions that I make in speaking tours talking to theists, but you have to convince me a God exists.
Captain Rabbit, couldn't Platonic forms be quantum fields like Tom says morality is? No. Well, I mean, they could, but that would make them not Platonic forms anymore.
Yeah, by definition, they would be real things.
Hey, TJump, so I know that we disagree on this, and I don't want to get into a debate on this, but with regards to the Platonic forms, if the external objective material world didn't exist and everything was predicated ultimately on the subjective, wouldn't that be one way to reconcile the external world that we experience and the Platonic forms or universals?
I don't know exactly what that means. Like, because Platonic forms are supposed to exist independent of minds. Like, if it only existed in a mind, then it wouldn't be a Platonic form. Platonic forms are things that are independent of all material and conscious states. So, like, if it existed in a mind, then it would just be a conceptual state. It wouldn't be a Platonic abstract.
True.
Tell me if I'm wrong, but I've always viewed Platonic ideals and abstractions and universals and stuff like that as though the person is trying to claim that there's some sort of third state to reality, where there's mind and then there's not mind and the physical stuff around us, but then there's this third state that imbues meaning from the outside in.
Yep, usually the universals. So there's like this essence of relation stuff.
Well, so to that point, so the reason why I asked is that so less along the way that Plato and Plotinus use
Plotinus?
I'm sorry, Plato, the way that Plato uses his conception of the forms. How about the way that the Eastern Orthodox use the conception of the logos, where they kind of have a rough equivalence between their conception of logos and Plato's conception of the forms?
Oh, yeah, they just say that
resides in the mind of God.
Yeah, they just say that they're all just concepts. So they're all just concepts in a big mind, kind of like Brahman, the Hindu version, that everything is just a concept in God's mind.
Yeah, so I think that's the way that the Eastern Orthodox, if the Eastern Orthodox were Hindus, they would describe the Platonic forms as having their ontological existence stemming from the mind and the consciousness of God rather than independent of it.
Sure.
But I wasn't aware that Plato didn't. I wasn't aware that Plato described the forms as absolutely objective or external to mind.
Well, that
So
was a
I appreciate
debate.
that.
Well, yeah.
That was kind of a debate that occurred between Plato and Aristotle, because Plato came up with both ideas of there being an ideal realm and a realm of forms. Aristotle kind of latched onto the idea that the forms mattered more than the ideals. So it was a bit of a back and forth between the two of them, to such to the point that Aristotle actually thought that there was such a thing as an Aristotelian soul, that instead of a soul being something that you had, you were a soul. And if you study some of the theology, Jehovah's Witnesses preach Aristotelian souls. You don't have a soul. You are a soul in the Aristotelian form.
Okay, so with that, with the Jehovah's Witnesses, would they say soul is commensurate with person, or that soul is equivalent to nature or essence?
No, you are a soul. So you don't have one, but everything that you label as you is your soul.
Yeah, but the Jehovah's Witnesses actually have a really clear delineation between nature and person. Do you know where they would ontologically root
I don't
soul?
know what you mean by nature and person. There's
I
mind and
have
non-mind.
no
Okay.
idea what
All right,
the
thanks.
Jehovah's Witnesses believe, actually, so I would have no way to actually answer that question.
Thanks, guys.
All right. Anybody got anything else interesting to say?
I sort of have a question.
How can you have a sort of question? Is it like, I don't know if you, is it like half a question that's like without a question mark?
It's kind of a question that that I haven't really thought about in detail, so that's why it's a sort of a question.
Ah,
So, with your involuntary imposition of will, would you consider Alzheimer's to be an immoral, involuntary imposition of will
yes.
of nature upon a person?
Yes. Yes, that is
I
correct.
figured that would be the case. It's something I have experience with, and I'm trying to put together arguments related to it without bringing the emotion into it, because I know, like, if you bring the emotion into it, people just dismiss it immediately as, oh, it's an appeal to emotion, blah blah blah. So I'm trying to put together some kind of logical idea as to how Alzheimer's disproves, at the very least, an all-loving Christian God.
Yeah, so that's
I
like,
don't see how the two things are compatible, you know.
yeah. I was talking about that earlier with Scott on my live stream before the after show. It's called natural evils. So there are natural evils, which are things that nature does to you: earthquakes, hurricanes, tornadoes, and those things are considered to be a part of the problem of evil. Why did God create these things if he's all powerful and all loving? And so that's essentially, Alzheimer's would just be a version of the problem of natural evil.
Cool.
It's also worth mentioning that there is an apologetic that it doesn't matter what evil it is you're talking about, it was always the result of mankind's sin. Like even natural disasters are somehow still a result of mankind's sin.
Yeah, it's supposed to be. That part's dumb, though. Tornadoes are your fault, Walker. You caused the tornado.
Yes, because the gay quarter in the red light district in New Orleans was the only area that didn't get flooded, and yet all the preachers said the natural disasters are a result of sin.
Yep. What is it? The Turn of the Frogs gay?
I believe it was Alex Jones, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was totally Alex.
I forget what was it? What is it that's turning the frogs gay? The water, the chemtrails or something?
Yeah, some
Fluoride or something.
yeah.
Personally, I
Something-
think it was Alex
You're on
Jones
there.
that turned the frogs gay. Take that, Alex.
All right, guys, I'm going to head off. Thanks for joining the after show. Thanks for watching, everybody in the audience. Thank you for the super chats and Patreon subscribers, as always, and I will talk to you guys later.
Later, dude.
Bye-bye.